My name is Jenni, and I've been married to my husband Jason for 17 years. We have 3 wonderful kids earthside and 1 in heaven. Jason and I dated for several years before we got married. We were a stable couple in our circle of friends. We rarely fought, but we came into marriage with brokenness from the homes that we were raised in, as well as brokenness from our own sinful choices we'd made thus far in our lives. I was raised in a home with domestic violence. I hated my dad, and I grew up seeing my mom hate her husband. I always wondered why I wasn't enough to make my dad a better husband, a better dad, etc. And Jason also had a strained relationship with his mom. So very early on in our marriage, we had problems. I had a very sharp tongue and was quick to criticize Jason and point out his flaws. Jason was in a career field where he worked closely with women and acted very inappropriately at times. He lacked boundaries with his female friendships and colleagues, and it didn't really bother him that it bothered me. That was a problem, and we just had very little respect for each other in our marriage. By all standards, we had a very worldly relationship. Christ was not really anywhere to be found in our marriage. And church was just something that we did on Sundays. About 5 years into our marriage, Jason became very sick. He was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that made him extremely ill. And during that year, he was hospitalized multiple times and had multiple surgeries. And we had 2 little kids at the time. We had a 2-year-old and a newborn when all that was happening. That year was beyond hard for us. We were in survival mode. And with 2 little kids and a sick husband, I became very resentful. Resentful that I was doing everything by myself. I felt very alone. Jason had essentially checked out. He was sick and couldn't believe how his disease had racked his body. He went from being a really physically active, buff guy, worked out 6 days a week, to just a shell of his former self. And he began to also doubt God's existence or, God's goodness. I mean, he wondered why. What is the point of all of the suffering? Why did God allow this to happen to me? Does God care about me? And we stopped going to church during that time too. He couldn't find a point in the suffering, and he was just miserable and angry. And he became someone that I didn't really like. And I ended up having an affair because of this. And this is an area of my life that I did not think that I was vulnerable to an attack, right, by Satan, or for that sin to enter in my life. I was not. I also didn't have great boundaries because I didn't think I needed them. I would never do something like that. So the affair went on for quite some time. And once the relationship began, it felt impossible to get out of. Things ended a few times, but they never stayed that way. I would see this person. I couldn't avoid seeing this person in my life, and things would always eventually resume. This went on for a year, which is really, it's really hard to say out loud. That went on for an entire year, and I knew that I couldn't make it stop. I couldn't make it stop on my own power. In some way, it was like an addiction. During that time, Jason and I and our family started attending a new church, and it was at that church that we started to hear about Jesus' love for us and his desire to have a relationship with us, and about God's grace. Up until that point in my life, God's grace was a foreign concept to me. I was kind of taught that it was like a ticket to sin. People used God's grace as a ticket to just do whatever they wanted. And I thought I had to work my way to heaven. I had to follow all the rules. I had to do all the right things, which was also very defeating because who can do that? It was like, what's the point? I'm never going to be good enough. So we started going to a new church and started hearing about God's grace. And I would sit in church every Sunday with tears streaming down my face from the weight of my secret sin, the way I was carrying that I couldn't talk to anybody about, that I was like trapped and snared in this sin, and I didn't know how to get free from it. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't know how to get out of this prison of sin that I had allowed myself to get into. I knew I had to tell my husband, but I was terrified of the consequences. What is going to happen to our family? So 1 year after it began, on a Thursday, I ended the affair again. 3 days later, on a Sunday, Jason approached me and asked me if we could talk about this particular person. I knew immediately what he wanted to talk about, and I said, "Is this our come to Jesus talk?" He had his suspicions, and I confirmed them. I told him everything. I confessed everything to him. He was heartbroken. He was devastated, but he wasn't surprised. He knew something was going on. He had his suspicions. He'd known that something was wrong for a while. Obviously, things were not good with us for a while, for a long time. I will say that as part of the weight during the course of that relationship, as our marriage got better during the course of that relationship, and I wanted to put the energy into my marriage, and I couldn't. There was this thing between us that I couldn't be close to my husband because of what I was doing, what I was keeping from him. So Jason told me he could see it in my eyes. He knew that I had been carrying something heavy that I needed to tell him. And that's his testimony too, is that he'll tell you that Jesus, the Holy Spirit, told him that he needed to let me tell him what was going on. His response was never what I would have expected. He was merciful. He didn't call me names. He didn't yell at me. He didn't put me down. He didn't insult me. All things that I would have expected from the home that I grew up in. I would have expected to just be treated like dirt, which is what I felt like I was at that point. Jason will tell you that it was the Holy Spirit that was with him that day that gave him that self-control, so that I could confide those things in him without fear. A short time later, I had a friend who had been reaching out to me, and I had been ignoring her. All I was able to tell her was that we were going through some hard things, but I couldn't talk about it then. So a few weeks later, I found myself on her couch, bawling, unable to say or to even tell her what had been going on, but trying. And I finally was able to spit out the words, "I had an affair. And Jason is being so nice to me, and I don't understand why." And she looked at me and she said, "You know why? It's because you're amazing." I was like, what's wrong with you people? Why are you being so nice to me? I am a horrible person. I did a horrible thing, and I don't deserve for you guys to be nice to me. While Jason and my friend were merciful towards me, I was not merciful towards myself. My whole life, I had never done anything like this before. My whole life, I thought people that cheated on their significant others that was just disgusting. How could anybody do that? How could you come home and look at your spouse in the face? How could you come home and look at your children in the face, knowing what you're doing? And then I did it. And so I felt all of those horrible things about myself. And, Satan really did attack where I didn't think I was vulnerable. After this, Jason wanted to confide in people in our life. He wanted to tell our families. He wanted to tell the people in our small group. And I was so ashamed. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. I didn't want to tell anybody about it. Which was hard. He needed to process also. And I was just so ashamed. I had been freed from that sin, but I was not freed from my shame of what I had done. I was haunted by flashbacks and random memories. I was unable to forgive myself, and that had just trapped the pain inside of me. It was torture, and I was constantly faced with memories of my sin. The past couldn't get in the past fast enough. Each day, each month was like a countdown. This many days since I told my husband, this many months since I told my husband. I couldn't get to years fast enough. Ironically, I became incredibly insecure in my marriage because if I could do it, anyone could do it. We struggled for a while trying to fix things on our own, and didn't go great. Lots of worldly ideas on how we can fix this and make it better. We ended up reaching out to our church, and we were referred to Living Foundation Ministries in Blue Springs. We sought out help, and we were referred to the biblical-based counseling that Living Foundation Ministries offers, where we learned how to communicate in a healthy way. Our first visit to Living Foundation Ministries, you have to fill out an intake form on why you're there. And I went through all of the things that were going wrong, or all the things that had happened, the health and financial, and just going through a really hard time, and yada, yada, yada. But I couldn't write the real reason that we were there. And when the counselor read it in front of us, he read what I wrote, and he was like, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And he gets to the end of it, and he looks up at me, and he says, and I just blurted it out, and I had an affair. And the very first thing he said to me just immediately was, "You're forgiven." And again, it was like, I don't feel that way. But Living Foundation Ministries, through there, we learned about our conflict style, how we handle conflict. And we were very different. Because of the home I was raised in, I avoid conflict. Because of the home Jason was in, he runs towards conflict. And so, I'm running, he's chasing. It didn't work. Conflict was hard. But we were given tools through Living Foundation Ministries on how to work through things, how to handle things, how to have those hard conversations without pushing each other away. About a year later, I attended a women's event where women shared stories of heartbreak and redemption. And it was so moving to hear stories from other women who had been through things, whether it was things they had done or things that had been done to them, and hear about the freedom that they had received from Jesus. And it was so moving. And that was really where my healing journey really kind of began, was hearing other women's stories. And actually 2 years later, I went back. It's something I never ever could have imagined doing. I went back and I shared my story with a group of women. Never could have imagined doing that when I first attended myself. But now I have that gift of seeing God use my past for His glory. It was through the people that God put in my life that I felt the love of Jesus in spite of my sin. There's a quote from a book I read. It's Living with the Heart Jesus Gave You. And it says, "Redemption is God bringing good out of bad, leading us to wholeness and the experience of God's amazing power. Redemption means that out of our greatest pain can come our most profound personal mission in life." Today, Jason and I have a marriage that is better than either of us could have ever imagined. While it's still hard, we still have hard times, but we're committed, and we have an intimacy that we didn't have before, being able to share hard things with each other, or just talk about things that before we probably would have shied away from. That was one thing we learned in counseling, was that we were always protecting ourselves. There never really was true intimacy in our relationship, and going through something as awful as that really allowed us to be safe with each other, to be intimate that way. We have mutual respect for each other now, and I can actually say that I adore my husband, which is something that I never would have said before, or could have even imagined saying. I just didn't know marriages like that in the past. We have learned that focusing on our own individual behavior instead of our spouse's is what yields change in our relationship. And I hate that what we have had to go through. I hate that what we've been through. I hate that I wish that it wasn't a part of my story. Don't get me wrong. But I'm so thankful for the fruit that's come from it. I'm so thankful for the relationship that we have, even though it still hurts to think about what we've been through. But we know that we're just two broken sinners who desperately need grace. And after it all, we have an awesome story of the power of Christ's redemption and restoration. It took me a long time to realize that I am not what I did. I am who God says I am. Satan kept me in shame for a long time by trying to call me what I did. Satan calls us by our sin, but God calls us beloved. Satan he loves to take what's beautiful and ruin it, whereas God loves to take what's been ruined and make it beautiful. I tell my kids, I have told my kids for as long as I can remember that there's nothing that they could ever do that would make me love them less. And I actually just said that to one of my kids the other night, and it hit me when I said it to them. That's exactly how Jesus feels about us. There's nothing that we could ever do that would make him love us less. He doesn't love us because of our performance. He doesn't love us because of how good we are. I mean, he takes delight in those things when we do them, but he doesn't love us because of it. Just the same as our children. I don't love my children because they're good, and I don't not love them when they're bad. I love them because they are my children. And that's exactly how God feels about us. I chose the song Who You Are by Unspoken. It was a song that really spoke to me during this time in my life. Some of the lyrics, all of the lyrics really spoke to me, but some of them that I picked out were, you refuse forgiveness like it's something to be earned. And then where you are is never too late, so bad, so much that you can't change. Those just spoke to me. Forgiveness was something that took me so long to accept. It was there the whole time, but I wouldn't take it. I felt like I had to prove myself or earn it, or, a certain amount of time had to go by before it would be okay. And it's just not the case. The minute that you confess your sin to Jesus, it's wiped clean. And where you are is never too late, so bad, so much that you can't change. Come to the foot of the cross and receive the freedom that Jesus has for you. Thank you for spending time with me today.
I know the look you're giving, like you've got something to prove. 'Cause I have walked for miles and miles in that same pair of shoes. You refuse forgiveness like it's something to be earned. Well, sometimes pain's the only way that we can learn. You can never fall too hard, so fast, so far that you can't get back when you're lost. Where you are is never too late, so bad, so much that you can't change who you are. Ooh, you can change who you are. Ooh, and you believe in freedom, but you don't know how to choose. You've got to step out of your feelings that you're so afraid to lose. And every day, you put your feet on the floor. You gotta walk through the door. It's never gonna be easy, but it's all worth fighting for. You can never fall too hard, so fast, so far that you can't get back when you're lost. Where you are is never too late, so bad, so much that you can't change who you are. Ooh, you can change who you are. Ooh, so let the ashes fall wherever they land. Come back from wherever you've been to the foot of the cross, to the feet of Jesus, feet of Jesus. You can never fall too hard, so fast, so far that you can't get back when you're lost. Where you are is never too late, so bad, so much that you can't change. You can never fall too hard, so fast, so far that you can't get back when you're lost. Where you are is never too late, so bad, so much that you can't change. The foot of the cross.